needed a present for my sister-in-law who's an avid Nordic skier, and I remembered that she doesn't have a ski waxing stand. The budget for the gift exchange is about $100, so I did some shopping around on the internet and found a few options, but almost all of them were out of the price range. The entry-level Toco was almost in the price range, but requires a workbench. I liked the higher-level Toco, but the price went up, and the Swix was a lot like the Toco, but more expensive. Then I found some really sweet solutions that included a stand and looked very portable, but the price tags were out of range. I also realized that my waxing stand had to be freestanding and not be clamped to an existing workbench, which ruled out the more economical options. So I decided I could probably make one myself and stay more or less in budget. I started with making a prototype based on a design I'd seen in the past that clamped to an existing workbench. I made a mock-up out of scrap softwood, and I liked the fact that the wedges provided adjustable angles and didn't require large blocks of wood. The process of inserting a wedge to set the height, though, wasn't ideal. Overall, it was functional, but my solution needed to be freestanding, so prototype number 1 is probably just going to be my waxing stand now rather than a gift. I returned to the internet and searched on DIY Nordic ski wax stand and found that, shockingly, I wasn't the first person to cross this bridge. Shout out to Melissa Bain, whose YouTube video DIY Portable Cross-Country Nordic Ski Waxing Bench was the inspiration for my solution and is faster and requires far fewer tools to build. If you're looking for a simple, elegant solution, check out her video. Sometimes simple is better. I took the best ideas I'd seen from Melissa and the commercial products and built a new prototype out of scrap wood. I liked how it shaped up and decided that with a few modifications like making the tip and tail pieces a little taller and shortening the supporting rail, that I had a good solution. I decided I could make the project out of some reclaimed lumber that I had, and since I was making it out of scrap lumber, the dimensions that I end up working with are quite arbitrary. I just did what looked right and didn't lose much sleep over precise measurements, except in a few critical places like the width of the center dado. To get started with the final project, I dug out some cut-offs and reclaimed lumber. The cherry pieces are left over from some previous products, and the maple is reclaimed from an old futon frame. By combining these two woods, I have enough to build the tip and tail pieces. I also found a piece of cherry, which is about the right length for a supporting rail. I used the pieces from Prototype 2 as a guide for drawing the pieces that needed to cut out. The tip and tail pieces are going to be a bit taller to make the bench a little higher to work on, so I modified the pattern as I was measuring. Once I had all the shapes drawn on the wood, it was time for some table sawing and band sawing. Before cutting anything on the table saw, I always like to check to make sure the blade is truly at 90 degrees, so I use my gauge to set the blade angle. The top pieces that the skis rest on are rectangular, so I cut those to the desired width of 2 1/4 inches on the table saw. This width was totally arbitrary based on the skis that I have. If you're a backcountry skier, maybe you need to make them wider, but this probably still offers enough support. I cut the shapes on the bandsaw and drilled a hole in the top of the triangle where a bolt will go through. This bolt is the pivot point for the top of the ski support. I put this hole a little too high, but since all of the force is downward, I don't think this will be a problem when the stand is used. I cleaned up the bandsaw marks using a hand plane and then a belt sander. A quick cut on the miter saw cleans up the ends of all the triangles. Once I was done sawing, I glued the tip and tail pieces together. I'll eventually need to run these over the stacked dado head on the table saw to widen the channel to 7/8 of an inch, but for now, the slot on the bottom will be 3/4 of an inch. To help position the centerpiece to the correct height, I set it on a scrap piece that was the right height while I got all the pieces ready to glue. While the glue was setting, I went back to working on some of the other pieces. Tip curve was a little bit rough from bandsaw marks, so I smoothed them out with the belt sander. If I'd started with 1.5 or 2 inch thick wood, I could have run the dado head through more easily, but because of the curve in the ski support, I had to attach some scrap to the bottom of the support so that it would be level going through the dado head. I also had to make sure that I don't go right through to the front of the ski support, so I have to stop feeding through the saw before I get to the end. The tailpiece, however, is just a straight run through. Doing the dado in the curved piece is a bit inelegant to say the least, so I'm not showing the video of that. If you're not comfortable that you're doing it safely, don't do it. With the dados cut in the ski supports, I can fit the triangles that support them. I could glue them in, which would make a very strong support, but I decided to just attach them with screws. This allows them to be repositioned. If the stand ever needs to be modified for very short skis, it can be done just by moving a few screws. It also allows the tops to be replaced easily if that happened to be necessary. With the glue on the tip and tail supports set, I could take them out of the clamps. They're not bad, but you can see that the centerpiece isn't exactly flush with the outside pieces. To remedy this sloppy work, I used the jointer, but I could have used a hand plane and then finished off with a belt sander. Now it was time to put the right width of dado in the bottom of the bases. This was a little trickier than I would have liked. The width of the T-slot channel is 7/8 of an inch, and my dado head only goes to 3/4 of an inch. So it meant that I had to do some trial and error running the bases through until I got the right width of dado. I also had to take into account that I was going to put varnish on everything, and that would make the channel a little bit narrower than it was cut as well. The support bases sit on top of a base of wood, which extends out beyond the ends of the support bench. The dado in the bottom of the support bases needs a rail to ride along in addition to the T-bolt track. So I'm using the dado head to cut down the sides of the base support to leave a small rail the same width as the T-bolt track. I set the pieces together and set a ski on top to get an idea of where the T-bolt tracks needed to be installed. Once I had their locations, I drilled pilot holes and screwed the tracks to the base. Once that was complete, I needed to drill holes for the T-bolts to go through the support bases. I measured a consistent distance from the end of each base and then took them to the drill press to drill the holes. The center lock is made of a few pieces, and I needed a base piece that is about 7 or 8 inches long. So I collected all the scraps of cherry and maple that I had left over. With a little work, I managed to salvage a piece of cherry that I could cut to the right size. The miter saw and table saw got it to the right dimensions, and I got a shallow dado in the bottom so that it would align with the rail on the base the same way the tip and tail supports do. With the base piece cut to size, I needed to figure out how long the vertical arms that go up to the ski needed to be. So I put the base that I had just cut in place on the assembled stand so far and measured the distance to the ski binding while the center lock base is up on an angle. I figured that 4 inches was about right. I rescued a couple pieces of maple that were part of some triangular cutoffs, squared off their ends, and then cut them to the right length. I drilled a hole partway through to hold the nail that I'm using for the ski to clamp to. The nail is about the same diameter as the ski binding piece, so I ground the head off the nail and fit it between the two 4-inch posts. For some reason, I decided to join the arms to the base with screws rather than gluing them. Glue probably would have held just fine, so I'm not really sure what my motivation was. I guess the one thing it does allow is it to be disassembled in case it is necessary to adjust the height of the nail. The final step for the center lock is to drill a hole through it and the base in the correct location for the T-bolt to come through. Then, because the center lock base tips up on an angle, I wanted to adjust the hole to allow it to easily tip up. So rather than being circular, it'll basically be an oval. I'm sure drilling this hole would have worked better and probably been safer if I'd adjusted the angle of the drill press table to drill this hole, rather than just holding it by hand, but I didn't think of that at the time. Anyway, mission accomplished with no collateral damage. The T-bolt that holds the center lock needs to be flush with the bottom of the support because it's going to be sitting on top of the support table. I traced around the bolt and then chopped it out using chisels and a mallet. When I put everything together, it looked like this. The pivoting tailpiece attaches to the base using a T-bolt and track and a tightening knob. The ski attaches to the center support, which is a combination of headless nail inserted between two vertical supports, which tighten down using the center knob, and the tip support, which is also attached using the same method as the tail. There are a few things I didn't capture on video. First, I didn't talk about the creation of this curved profile to support the tip of the ski. In order to do this, I took a second piece of wood and laminated it to the longer piece so that I had a big square block, and then I traced the profile of the ski onto the wood and cut it out on the bandsaw on its side so that I got a much smoother profile, and it extended down further than if I had just a single thickness of wood. I don't know if it's really necessary, but I like the look and it gives a little more support when you're working on the tip of the ski. I also added padding on top of the ski supports. The padding is a combination of cork and neoprene, and I glued it on using contact cement. It provides a soft, non-slip contact surface for the skis to rest on, so that when the ski is clamped down, everything is really tight together. You can also see here the holes for the screws that were used to attach the ski supports to the pivots. When I did the final assembly of the pivoting pieces, I didn't like how the wood rubbed together, so I used a brad point drill on the drill press to partially countersink some washers, which reduced the wood-on-wood rubbing, but still kept enough friction for the pivots to move not too freely. You can also see from this close-up that I should have drilled the holes a little further down. Mounting the support board onto the Sawhorse was a little tricky, but the Sawhorse has 4 pre-drilled holes to feed bolts through, so with a little work and a little futzing around, the process was relatively simple. Finally, I also finished the stand with 2 coats of clear varnish. I rubbed out both coats with 4-0 steel wool to get a nice matte finish. As I said at the start, the measurements are all mostly arbitrary, but if you're looking for some references, here are some of the main measurements. Remember that all of the wood was 3/4 inch thickness. The tip support is 25 inches long. The bottom base is 24 inches long. The total height from top to bottom at the pivot point is about 7 inches in total. The base height is about 3 inches. The clamp base is about 7.5 inches in length, but again, completely arbitrary, and the arms are 4 inches tall. The hole for the T-bolt was drilled in approximately the center. The tail support is about 18 inches long, and the support base is about 15 inches long, and the base height is the same as the tip support at 3 inches. When all was said and done, did this really cost less than $100 target price? Well, it's actually close, but only because I used reclaimed and leftover wood. The biggest cost was the Sawhorse, which was $59. There is a less expensive model of that Sawhorse, but it wasn't available when I was shopping. I think it's about $39. You can get the Sawhorse as well as the general nuts and bolts and washers for the pivots and mounting on the Sawhorse from many popular building supply stores. The T-bolt, tracks, knobs, as well as the glue and cork neoprene top all came from Lee Valley Tools. The good thing about this project is that most of the pieces are fairly small, so you don't need 8-foot pieces of wood, for example. Nothing is more than 2 feet long, with the exception of the support base. You can often get cutoffs at a discount. I checked out our local hardware store and I could get enough cutoffs on sale for about $20, so it's something to look at, and that would allow you to come in pretty close to the $100 budget. Things on this project that could be done differently: you don't need the Sawhorse. If you have a sturdy bench to clamp the waxing jig to, you can simply clamp it to an existing bench. I designed this jig to support the length of skis that my family uses, with some room to spare for longer and shorter skis, but longer T-bolt tracks would allow an even wider range of skis to be supported. Having the pivot point at the end rather than near the middle, like my very first prototype, would probably provide a firmer base, so maybe that would be better in the long run, but it would change the overall design. There should also be a table attached to the stand to hold wax and assorted waxing tools. It could probably be attached to the yellow end pieces of the Sawhorse. I would prefer to have a cam lock release rather than a knob to tighten down the ski, but I couldn't find or make one that worked as well as the system I ended up using, so maybe this is the best way. I think with the next one, I'll make the center piece of the bases 7/8 of an inch thickness, so that maybe I won't have to run the assembled pieces through the dado head multiple times to get the desired dado width. Congratulations on the purchase of the Ski-Wax-O-Matic. In order to get waxing skis, you first have to set it up correctly. Start by turning the Ski-Wax-O-Matic upside down on the ground. You'll note there's a release for the legs. Press the release, open the legs and lock them tight. Press the release on the second set of legs and repeat the process. Once you've set up the legs, you can then turn the whole stand right side up again. And the Ski-Wax-O-Matic is just about ready to go. Turn this around so that it's facing the end with the curve on it. For packaging and storage, the tailpiece is turned around 180 degrees, so you need to loosen the nut and turn it around. Note there's a T-bolt on the bottom, and the T-bolt has to fit into the track and you slide it in. That's all you need to do to get the stand ready to go. Now we need to put a ski on it and adjust the stand to fit the ski. We start off by positioning the ski binding directly over the metal bar. Put it into the binding just like you would your boot and click it in so that it's now clamped to the center. You can now adjust each end by loosening the nut and adjusting the position so that it lines up with the curve of the ski. Then tighten the nut down. Do the same with the tail. Adjust the angle and the position. You'll notice there's a slight taper at the end of the support to allow for the slight curve up that is at the end of most skis. Then lock in the nut. Once you've got everything adjusted, you can tighten the center nut to tighten the ski down firmly. That's all you need to do. Your ski is locked in tightly in place, and you can now start doing all the waxing you need to do on the ski. Happy waxing, and have a great ski!